Hello everybody, my name is Krisskoy and I'm lucky to be here, and I was even more lucky to be in China in the most interesting period of its economic development. I've been in China since 1993 until 2014, and I was responsible for sourcing many products in China, so I do have first-hand experience in buying in China and managing the supply chain. So in this series of short videos I will share my experience with you and hope that it will prove useful for you. In this video we'll be talking about some basics about sourcing in China. So everybody knows that China is the factory of the world. Why it became so? Well, of course it's the result of 40 years of development. China was opened and started the economic reforms exactly 40 years ago, and the superpower that we see today is the result of this development. Of course, we will not analyze how exactly it became this factory of the world, but for us it is important to know that it's indeed a factory where almost everything can be manufactured, and actually almost everything was manufactured during the last couple of decades. So, what are the basics of supply chain in China? What are the basics of buying in China? It's important for us to remember that there is a very strict price-quality relationship. Actually, Chinese say it with a typical saying, 一分钱一分货, which means you pay 1 cent more and you get 1% of quality more. We could translate it this way. So basically, the more you pay, the better quality of goods you get. It seems basic indeed, but it's very important for us to remember, because one of the main reasons why China has become a factory of the world is that they are able to offer you a wide range of qualities. It means that if you're coming to China and you want to buy, let's say, a mobile phone, you want to source mobile phone, you want it to be manufactured for you, they could manufacture it very cheaply and you get certain quality, or they could manufacture a thing like iPhone, which is actually manufactured in China, as we all know. So for you just important to remember that you have to be very specific in your requirements, what kind of quality you want, and then realize that miracles don't happen, because even up to today I meet people who still think that if they go to China and buy something there, it's going to be 20, 30, 50% cheaper than if they would buy it in their home country, which is not the case. Or it might be the case, but in this case actually we would have to investigate the whole supply chain after China. Because another basic but important fact is that for majority of Chinese factories, the profits are slim. They are working in single digits basically. So you can order things there cheaply, but also remember that the price difference that you see with products that are sold in the West is not because the factory charges a huge margin. It's usually due to the fact that there are few intermediaries, then there are custom duties, transportation costs, etc, etc, etc. So remember that most of the factories, they work on the slim margins, and it's very important that you know yourself, you know the quality of merchandise that you want, and you are prepared to pay the price that is needed for that quality. In majority of cases, again, it means that you will be disappointed that China is not as cheap as you think, because also in, let's say, last 10 years or 15 years, the prices were steadily rising in China. All the costs like salaries, the electricity fee, etc, 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 all the logistics costs have been on the rise. And that's normal, because China started from a very low starting point, so the wages were really cheap, and some people still think that people working in factories in China earn like hundreds of US dollars or euros per month, which is not the case anymore. So the costs are on the rise, and then the issue of quality becomes even more and more important. And then another important point for us to remember is that cultural differences do exist. Majority of Chinese factories owners and people working in them, managing them, are very honest people, hardworking, they're really struggling to make money, and usually the business might be big, but you will be also surprised to discover that they operate on very slim margins, and that usually they don't have much capital. That's actually the topic of our another video. But it's important for you to remember that they are honest, but cultural differences exist. And in many cases it manifests itself in how we view contracts. So Chinese side usually doesn't view the contract the same way as we look at the contracts, because we think that it's something that is set and has to be followed like it's set in stone. For Chinese side, it's usually more dynamic. Again, we're not saying here that one attitude is better or another is more appropriate. What we're saying is that cultural differences do exist, and you really have to remember that when you are negotiating in China, when you are building your supply chain in China, you just have to factor this in your analysis. When you're buying in China, of course, the most important thing is the price. Well, one of the most important things is the price. So the negotiation with Chinese party usually starts with a high price. Of course, now we have more transparency. You can check the price of the merchandise online, or you can check it with different people trying to get different angles and different sources of information. But again, usually you are into a surprise, because you will be expecting that the Chinese side will give you lower price, but in reality, usually the first quotation that you get is not that what you would expect. How you have to react? It's perfectly normal, so you don't have to get angry, you don't have to scream and say, oh, why you offer me high price while I can check that online, or like my competitors are selling at lower prices. Just also remember the basic idea is that usually people are sourcing China for a long time. So if they have a low price, it means they've been doing that for years. And it's perfectly normal that you, as a new entrant into this market, will be getting higher prices. So what can you do? It's again very basic. You have to negotiate, of course, you have to push the price, but remember what we were saying before. Price directly connects to the quality. So the lower price you will get, expect that the quality will be sacrificed. And again, also remember that first orders, there might happen a few different situations with the price on the first orders, and we will just briefly talk about each of these potential situations. But the normal proceeding of things is that in the first order you will get slightly higher price, and then as you work through your quantities, the price will be gradually coming down. It also has a lot of economical reasons behind that. It's usually the amortization of the tools, etc. But again, be patient and then do your investigation of the market. And as we were talking about the price in the first order, what might happen is, of course, the first situation is the price will be higher than average, and in this case you have to go through the quantities and through the analysis of why the price is higher, analysis of the components, analysis of raw material, etc. Or the other situation is probably more dangerous for you. If the first order will have unusually low price, it also might be an indication of something not really healthy going on behind the curtain. Because some Chinese factories, they are desperate to attract foreign customers, so they are offering low price as a kind of bait for you. And if you start buying, then they expect you to be locked into the relationship, and you will discover that the price will go substantially up in the next orders. Why? Also because they will realize that probably now you're too dependent on them, or probably they will also play some tricks with your brand. It's another thing that you have to remember, that you always have to register your brand in China, so the brand protection is very important. And there are other things that might be going on, so be suspicious if the first order price is too low. When you're building your supply chain in China, it's also very important that you find decision makers. And you will be surprised, but in many situations it's actually quite hard to get access to decision making. What happens? A lot of factories, they operate on orders. It means that they have their order book, and it's also not easy to get to them, and it's sometimes not easy to place an order. And also, more important, it's not easy to really negotiate through all the details. The price, the delivery time, the quality, even the quantity. So you have to remember that in Chinese structure, a lot of people are in between, but usually the decision maker is only one. Usually it happens to be the factory owner, or it might be the general manager. So it's important for you to remember that not everybody can make decisions. So even if somebody appears to be decisive and appears to give you solutions and answers, it doesn't mean that's the final decision maker. So how to get to the decision makers? Usually the best strategy would be to go personally and visit the factory, because also there is an illusion that you can do everything online. Although we have now very good communication channels, and you can do a lot of things remotely. You could communicate with the Chinese counterparty by email, although that's not as effective, by messengers. And here I would recommend that you definitely have to use the WeChat application, which is like the best communication tool now to talk to the factories and actually to talk to virtually everybody in China. And you can do this on the phone, but nothing still replaces the personal visit. So you have to go to the factory because you have to inspect it personally, and that's the way how you force the Chinese side also maybe to present you with an opportunity to meet the decision maker. And then of course you have to catch this opportunity and proceed with negotiation directly with somebody who can make decisions. You would ask, what happens to the design of the merchandise? Again, we're speaking about supply chain. So usually you have to have a product as an outcome of a process, and of course this product usually has to go through different design stages. And again, this is a very, very, very important part of your work when you're building your supply chain in China. Because what happened is, a lot of foreign companies, especially before, they really believed that if you just give a sample to the Chinese side, if you bring a kind of prototype, they would be doing things exactly to your specification, which is not the case in majority of situations. So you have to be really involved into the whole process of the design of the process, of the manufacturing process. You have to try to be there and talk to the engineers. Of course, what happens is a lot of Chinese engineers, they don't like to take advice from foreign party. Of course, a lot of them really think that they know their manufacturing process much better. And of course, they think that they know how to do the tweaks and adjustments. But you have to be skeptical of the Chinese engineers' ability to do things exactly as you envision them. Well, they are able engineers and they do have good manufacturing processes, but it's really much better for you. You would be much more in control if you would try to understand the whole manufacturing process, and if you would just go to the factory, try to talk to the engineers. Of course, there are linguistic barriers involved, but still you have to make this effort, and you have to constantly monitor what happens to the design process of your product. Because usually the Chinese engineers will try to make some adjustments as to make the manufacturing process less costly, because that's also their way to get that lower price. Or actually what happens is they will give you the lower price and they will try to win you as a customer by providing you with this very attractive offer, but once they start manufacturing, they will try to cut corners, they will try to decrease their cost, and of course to make a little bit more of their margin. So remember, and it's very important, that if you just provide the Chinese side with the product, it doesn't mean that they will manufacture exactly the same. And even if they manufacture something that looks exactly the same, it doesn't mean that all the standards have been followed through. It doesn't mean that the whole process was, the manufacturing process was up to your expectation, up to some standards that are probably applicable in your country. So be careful, try to be inquisitive, and try to control the whole process. One of the things that you have to be aware of is that the Chinese side might try to bring the situation to the point where it is very costly for you to cancel the order. So it's done usually with lengthy negotiations where you invested a lot of time. So for you really to go and look for another supplier would be a kind of problem because you don't have time, or you already wasted your energy and you feel that okay, once you've done the selection, it's not good to start the selection process again. So just remember that these things might be used against you. So if you see that the negotiation with the Chinese supplier goes for a long time, that you're not really getting the product or the quality or the price that you want, just think that you might have to think about it as sunk cost and start the whole process of finding and screening suppliers again. Because remember that if you're engaged and if the Chinese side sees that for you it's really difficult to pull out of this relationship, then they will have the bargaining power on their side. And another important thing for us to remember is that the first order is just the beginning of the relationship. So in the first order everything might be a little bit better than average. The quality might be better, or it actually might be just what you expect. The price will be okay, what you really expected, what you needed, but it's just the first order, because what happens later is the quality fade. This is a very important concept, and it happens usually with second, third or fourth order, because again, it's not because the Chinese side is bad or they're really thinking about how to trick you or how to take a big advantage of you. It happens usually because they have agreed to the price, which is, if you're a very good negotiator, just a little bit low, and they're making small margins. So from the beginning they're thinking that, right, we will agree to this price, but then we will try to make manufacturing process a bit less expensive, so we'll increase our margin. And of course, everything that you do to make the manufacturing process or logistic process cheaper reflects directly on quality or the whole timing for the supply chain. So you have again to remember that the first order is important. You have to negotiate well, you have to invest a lot of time, but don't really take a rest when it comes to the second and third order. Probably the second and the third order or other orders is even more important, because you have to be even more aware of the potential quality issues, and you have to check and verify constantly that everything is done according to what you have agreed and what you need, because otherwise you will have problems when you receive the merchandise. What about compensation if you receive a merchandise which is not up to your standards? What happens if you discover that actually what you got is not what you bargained for? Well, Chinese factories do compensate, and Chinese factories do recognize that they have made mistakes. And actually, although it will not usually be a very direct process of them saying, yes, we've done it wrong, because it's not in the cultural code of the Chinese mentality to admit readily for the mistakes. So they will usually try to come with a kind of explanation that on the surface seems reasonable, or might not be even so reasonable, but nevertheless it's still an explanation. So they will try to tell you why it's not done according to your specification, or that your specifications is actually more or less the same as the product that you've got, blah blah blah. But it's for us important to understand that they do compensate and they do recognize their mistake, again, although not in a direct way. But also remember that they will almost never take the merchandise back. It's very difficult to send defective goods back to China. It's difficult for the factory to accept it for many reasons. It's the custom issues, it's logistic issues, and also the law in China really doesn't favor this kind of operations. The law in China tries to protect China from receiving bad merchandise back. So when the factory says that they cannot receive back the defective goods, it might be the truth. Of course, still you have to do your investigation. So it's almost impossible to send goods back, and it's almost impossible to get money back. So if you're saying, right, then I canceled, so please give me back my deposit, or please give me back the money that I paid for the merchandise, remember, it's extremely difficult to get it back. Well, also for many reasons, because usually Chinese factories, they have used your money to manufacture goods, because they do it on orders, they don't usually have stocks. So your money basically is gone, it was invested in the process, and also because of the foreign exchange laws in China makes it difficult for the Chinese company to pay money out of China and compensate you or return your money to your foreign country, to convert it back to US dollars or euros, etc. So then you will ask, if the Chinese factories compensate and they recognize their mistakes, how do they compensate? Of course, the process is very simple. They will tell you, right, we've done this thing badly, we admit it, so we'll compensate it in the next order. So in a way, they're trying also to lock you into the relationship. They will say, in the next order you will have more merchandise as compensation, or you will have reduced price, etc. Again, this is part of the game, part of the situation. You just have to be aware that it happens, and there are few ways around that. So usually if you're really desperate to get some compensation, it means that you will have to go for continuation of the relationship. But important to remember that this has logical reason behind, and it's not that somebody is trying to cheat you or to outsmart you, etc. So once you're ready to buy in China, you have to be aware that the money that you pay there will not come back even if something goes wrong.